Hello watch lovers, welcome back to the channel. My name is Stian and today we have a beautiful old Jaeger-LeCoultre on the bench. Well, when I say beautiful and old, it's at least 50% true. It is old and it could be beautiful. So let's see what we can do. The watch is not really running. Not that we can really tell, to be honest. Oh, and even the crown came out. So let's get our snag counter up and running, because it's gonna overheat in this video. So the first snag is the crown. We're able to resolve that at least partially, but we already see a couple more snags. The second sand is missing. And the date hand, which should move around the edge of the dial, is also missing. So here's your chance to make a bet with your friends. How many snags do you think we'll find in this video? Or comment below. So I'm not counting as snags the condition of the dial and the discs and so forth, but finding those hands is going to be a bit difficult. We also see the pushers do not respond, which isn't very surprising, of course. The case has this beautiful teardrop lugs. It's quite worn, and we're not going to be able to make the case new, and honestly I wouldn't do that either. But we will make it shiny, which is very important on YouTube. Taking off the back and the bezel, we see that the dial has seen a lot of better days. So we're going to have to do something about that. The movement comes out through the front. So I'm protecting the dial with crystal. That's old habit. Doesn't really need to be done when the dial is in this condition, to be honest. But anyway. So there's a lot of stuff between the movement and the dial. So the dial has a couple of small pillars, if you will. So we have to unscrew it there, and then we can finally get the dial off. Uh-oh. We are going to count that rust as a snag. So we're going to put away the hands, and then we're going to do some black magic with the dial. I have this jar full of dial cleaning liquid, and at midnight I will completely undress, stand in front of the mirror and kill a chicken, and then put the blood into that jar. And that should fix the dial. So we see these discs showing the month and the weekday are completely destroyed. I mean, the discs themselves are of course not destroyed, but printing on them. And we see these screws are pretty darn stuck. There's a lot more rust here than expected. So the watch belongs to Walter, or truly his father. And Walter didn't think there would be an issue with rust in the movement, because you cannot see it from anywhere. But of course there's a reason the dial and the discs were as damaged. And of course that reason is water ingress. So water ingress typically comes in through the crown, and that's what happened here. So a lot of these screws are damaged. So for those keeping track at home, this is a Jaeger-LeCoultre 484 movement. And yes, I just said Jaeger-LeCoultre. Honestly, I kind of prefer that way of saying it, even though around here they would say Jaeger-LeCoultre, or actually Jaeger-LeCoultre. But that does sound a bit pretentious, so I'm going to go with Jaeger-LeCoultre. Of course, a very renowned watchmaker, often called the watchmaker's watchmaker, because they have produced movements, or at least embauche blanks, for a lot of famous companies, including Cartier, Patek, and so forth. The company LeCoultre was started almost 200 years ago in 1833 in Vallée-d'Urgeau in Switzerland, in a little village called Le Sentier. It turned into Jaeger-LeCoultre in the early 1900s after starting to cooperate with a German heritage French watchmaker called Edmond Jaeger, or Edmond Jaeger, I suppose, in French. And as I'm saying that, we get to the next snag. Cannot really see it here, but the upper pivot is broken. Now normally that's not really a big deal. You just get a new balance staff and put it in. So what I'm doing here is I'm first taking off the roller, and then I'm going to take the balance staff out of the balance wheel. And after doing that, then you put the new balance in. And you have to rivet the new balance. So for that I'm using a staking tool. The tool I'm using here is called the Playtax tool. It's an old tool that's not made anymore. You can find this tool still sometimes on eBay or the like. And you do get some sort of similar tool on AliExpress, I believe. But then again, if you don't work on old watches, you really don't need it. So that's how it is. After we have taken out the old balance staff, we then are going to put the balance onto the new one. And we do that in our staking tool. We're going to first find the right hole for the balance staff. Then we're going to center it so we know our tool is perfectly upright. And then it's time for Hulk Smash! Okay, so maybe not really Hulk Smash, but anyway. So far so good, but I mentioned there was an issue, and that issue is partially what we see here. The pivots are of different sizes. Now that wouldn't really be an issue itself if the balance staff I got was actually of those sizes, but it wasn't. I bought 3 balance staffs that should fit this caliber, and they all had 0.9mm pivots. So I'm using a Jaco tool and a burnisher to try to reduce the size of the pivots. The issue is that the pivots are so thin that if the burnisher goes a little bit over on the shoulder of the pivot, it just snaps. So that happened a couple of times. So I decided to do what I probably should have done to begin with. I made this little safety guard for the Jaco tool. Pretty simple little thing, and certainly not beautiful, but it does work. You will find this referenced in a few watchmaking books as well. You simply fasten it to the Jaco tool and make sure that that little fork in it fits nicely with the balance staff. And then when you tighten it, it makes sure that the burnisher does not slip over to the shoulder. So here we can see it in action. So it safeguards the burnisher so that you don't break pivots, and it makes it possible to much more confidently reduce the size of the pivot. So with that done, everything is hunky-dory, right? No. The hairspring is out of round. You can see that it's pretty skewed to the left here. So before putting it back on the balance, I need to adjust that a little bit. So it may look like I'm shaking like a belly dancer trying to get a bonus, but the hairspring is pretty small. The entire width of it is some 4 or 5 millimeters. So between each coil is really not a lot of space. Anyway, I will continue taking apart the movement. Remember, we actually had only taken off the balance and already found, what was it, 8 snags. So this watch is a snag-rich environment for sure. So we're going to take apart the rest of the movement. It's a very nicely decorated movement. Nice quality. And no, We're not going to call this a snag. That's more like a full head of hair. This movement, I believe, is from the late 1940s. Very solid movement with thick bridges, big screws. So that's nice to work on. All this liquid is the rust dissolver that I put on the dial side. So to give that some time to work, I started taking off the parts on the train side. Now we can turn back to the dial side. This piece here looks pretty bad. This is a 3-part piece with jumpers for the date wheel and also the month disc, as well as a spring for returning the month corrector. Looks pretty bad, but we'll see what we can do. So one of the big issues in working on this kind of watch is that it's very, very difficult to get parts for these kinds of watches. This watch, when in good condition, will be worth some 5,000–6,000 euros. So even if I could find spare parts, and I couldn't, it would be extremely expensive. And Walter was on a bit of a budget for the repair of this watch, so I'm gonna have to try to make do with what I have here. So the stem finally came out. So we are gonna try to clean up most of this rust and then see what we can do. So most of the parts in the watch are made from brass, typically. So the bridges, the main plate, that kind of thing, the wheels. But then you do have quite a few steel parts as well, like we see here. Keyless works is a lot of steel parts. Of course, all the pivots, the pinions. So we do see that the main plate with the keyless works on it did clean up quite a bit in my rust cleaning. So we're going to try that on the other pieces also. So I'm going to put that into the ultrasonic also. And then while that is simmering, we can take out the main spring. So I mentioned already that it's very difficult to find spare parts for this watch, and some of these parts are also very difficult to make, so I wouldn't really try that. So what does that actually mean then for the watch? Well, it means that we probably will be able to make it run and make it work, basically, but it's not gonna be perfect. So just to manage expectations a little bit. So one of the questions that arise then is whether it's actually sustainable to repair old watches like this. Because the time spent on this watch was a whole lot more than I actually charged Walter for. Part of that was due to a long delay in getting the dial fixed, but also all the issues with the balance staff and so forth. And if I were to charge each single hour, then it would be thousands of euros. Of course, if Walter would take his watch to LeCoultre, or if they would even work on it, that's not for sure. But they would certainly charge 4,000 or 5,000 euros for restoring the watch. But then they would also find spare parts, of course. So that would be a big difference. All right, here we have all the parts laid out. Most of them cleaned up relatively well. So we're going to put the balance back on the watch, and then we're going to put everything through the cleaner. And while doing that, I want to thank all my members on YouTube and Patreon. Really appreciate the support, guys. As a member, you get access to exclusive videos. You get member versions of the public videos, but also videos on different tasks related to watchmaking. We have an active community on our Discord server where the members can share things they're working on, get input from others and so forth. And we also do bi-weekly Ask Me Anything sessions. So if you're curious about the membership, you can click the join button below, then you will see the different membership tiers. Or you can go to this URL on Patreon. All right, with the movement parts back from the cleaning machine, we're gonna first oil the shock settings. Put a little bit of oil in the middle of the capstones here. And then we can put the chatons on top and then put those back in the balance. So Jaeger-LeCoultre, they use this power shock system where you have to twist this springy lever over and then put the shock setting in underneath. And then it's more or less the same way on the dial side, just secured with a screw. And with that in place, we can check if the balance oscillates freely. And that looks all right. So I mentioned already that some of the parts are pretty worn. And here we have another snag. We see the winding pinion is overall quite worn, but two of the teeth are completely worn off or broken off. So I did actually manage to find the movement for parts. So I'm going to cannibalize that one. But that's the base movement, so without any of the complications of the calendar system. But there are some parts that we can steal from this one. See, it's also not finished to the same standard. And also given that this is a base movement, some of the pivots are much shorter, so we cannot reuse any wheels, for instance. But we do get some fresh parts. Fresh as in pre-owned, but still better than most of these rusted parts. But again, the parts in the complication, in the calendar, triple calendar works, we have to reuse. So let's get cracking with assembly. We're going to start with the underside of the barrel bridge. And as we can see, there we find the click and also the crown wheel. And the crown wheel here is what meshes with the winding pinion. So those broken teeth on the winding pinion, if you have more than two broken teeth, then you will not be able to wind the watch at all. And if you have one or two broken teeth, then you will get a bit rough winding and you'll feel that it slips. So I'm going to reuse most of the parts that I can in the base movement before we then get to the triple calendar, and we're going to see how those parts look now. It is a beautiful old movement. It really is a shame that it had some water ingress. I do not know what happened to the watch, but this watch was of course never waterproof or water resistant to a very high degree. It is a dress watch, and dress watches from this time really didn't have much in terms of water resistance. And water resistance in itself is a very interesting concept, I find. So on my website, vintagewatchservices.eu, pretty much all the watches I sell are sold as not water resistant. And I very often get questions about that. So can the watches be worn if you want to wash your hands, for instance? Can you walk outside in the rain with the watches on? And the main reason that we sell our watches as not water resistant is that there are a lot of misconceptions about water resistance. So a water resistance rating of 3 ATM, for instance, So ATM is atmospheric pressure. And the basic rule is that in the water, every 10 meters you go down into the sea is 1 atmospheric pressure. And of course, you already have 1 atmospheric pressure from the actual atmosphere above you. So then a lot of people will think, okay, so 1 plus 2 is 3, so that would mean at least 20 meters then. And some people will think it would be 30 meters you can go down into the sea with your watch on, which would utterly destroy your watch. So a 3 ATM rating is basically defined as splash resistant. So you can wash your hands with the watch on, you can walk outside, you can get splashed on, but you cannot get the watch soaked. That will destroy it. So as a general rule, you do not want to take your watch to the beach, to the sea, unless it's at least 10 ATM. And water resistance in itself is basically a matter of tolerances. So watches are produced to pretty tight tolerances. And then you put rubber gaskets in between the parts to squeeze out the last of those tolerances. But as your watch is being banged into door jambs and what have you over the decades, those tolerances become much, much bigger. And whoosh goes the water resistance. Anyway, we are lubricating the escapement. Putting a little bit too much oil on here, so I'm taking it off again with a dry oiler. So what I'm doing is I'm putting the oil in the middle of this impulse surface on the jewel here. And then moving the pallet fork a little bit back and forth, we distribute that oil over the escape wheel teeth. All right, then we can see if this watch wants to run now, after all these problems. Always nice to see that balance start up. And then we can oil the various bearings. And then we're going to demagnetize the watch and check on the time grapher. And that looks relatively promising. So we saw the beat rate is good. Beat error is much off. So we're going to adjust that by moving the collet on the balance staff. Just ever so slightly. And after a couple of times doing that, and that I didn't show on camera, we see we get a pretty good rate out of it. So with that, let's then start rebuilding the triple calendar. So a triple calendar is in essence not as complicated as it might seem. You first of all will have one corrector typically for each of the different calendar parts. You will have a jumper for each of them. And then you'll probably have a couple of springs that push the correctors back after pressing them. You also need 1 or 2 driving wheels. The first of the driving wheels we're going to look at is the month wheel, which we have here, with 31 teeth and a finger on the underside, which then flips over the month disc. The main driving wheel, however, meshes directly with the hour wheel, and we have another snag. There should be a pin here, where that little stub is now. That pin is what pushes the date wheel over. We can see it was riveted in from the underside there. So we're going to have to push it out on the staking tool. And we're going to have to make a new pin and rivet that one in. So also not a massive component. It's about 0.2 millimeters thick, and then in the end it should be about 1 millimeter long. I'm going to make it a little bit longer than that, and then press it in and shorten it afterwards. So with that little stub out, I made a new pin on the watchmaker's lathe, a little bit tapered so that it will press fit in and then stay there. It's pretty small also. This is human hair. And guys, I hope you really appreciate the sacrifice. I had to like shave off almost all my hair just to find one that was not gray. So then we can use the staking tool to press the new pin in. And then we can adjust the length afterwards. We can also just make sure that the end of the pin doesn't stick out too bad. So we're going to file that down on the underside. All right, then we can put the driving wheel in place. We're going to check that it meshes properly with the date wheel, which is what the pin will drive. This finger here will drive the day disc. Some very small screws there. And yes, if you're curious, I'm working on this late at night. That's why the lighting isn't great in these shots. Sorry about that. This here is the date corrector. It then pushes on the date wheel. I'm putting a little bit of lubrication on the friction points between the different jumpers and springs. And then we can put the date wheel on top of the arrow wheel, and then we can test our driving wheel. And the pin on the driving wheel should then flip over one of the teeth on the date wheel in the middle here, which we see it does there. Just enough for the jumper to bring it all the way over. Now, as I was doing that, I saw that one of the teeth on the date wheel is a bit damaged. So we see the tip of one of these teeth, the one that's coming in focus there. So the tip is rounded, so the tooth has somehow been a bit damaged, which means it's not going to extend as far as the others. So if we're lucky, then we're going to see that this tooth does flip over. And if not, then indeed another snag. So the problem here is that the tip has been somehow sheared off. So we're going to mark it with some Sharpie and then do a little bit of a crude fix, just peen it a little bit so it becomes longer. And that little extra length is enough to make the jumper take over and flip the wheel over. So mission accomplished. So it's time to place the discs. I got them back from the redialer together with the dial. Looks slightly better now. So I'm first going to put on the weekday disc. Then I put the jumper on the underside of it. The jumper then works on a star wheel on the underside. And since there are only 7 teeth in that star wheel, it takes a little while to actually flip the disc over as well, as we saw. But it's driven by the same driving wheel. Then the month disc, which we know is also driven by the same driving wheel, but it takes then 31 flips to make it flip over. So then we can put the dial on, and yeah, that doesn't look right, does it? So I'm going to try to turn the star wheel a little bit. It is friction fit, so that is possible to align it in the window. But that is not right, is it? So I did get hold of 2 old original discs. My redialer did a good job on the dial, but somehow it really messed up the discs. Getting the replacements was quite expensive, but well, as I mentioned, it's difficult to find parts for these watches, and when you do find them, then they're going to cost you. So here I'm testing the month corrector. As it turns out, this wheel is also a little bit damaged. The star wheel underneath is a little bit bent. So for 2 of the months it doesn't flip over properly. But at this point we'll just have to live with that. And what is this though? So the date corrector is also not able to flip all dates over. So we are going to adjust the surface a little bit of the date corrector. And that should help us make that action a little bit more consistent. We're not going to take a lot of the surface off. We're just going to basically mark it with a Sharpie and then take off the marking. That's pretty much all we're going to take off. So I'm using a very fine file here, but a file is still much too rough for a working surface like this. So what I'm not showing in the video is that I also used a very fine sandpaper up to 5000 grit to make the surface very smooth. And that should help us a little bit with the action. But again, ideally we would have just replaced the parts. So we just have to live with the fact that this watch will not be perfect. And that does bother me, but that's how it is. I did find a new original rose gold date hand. So that looks quite nice on the watch. The hand has an elbow in it, so a bend basically. And that is to allow the hour hand in particular to move around on top of the date hand. So when placing the date hand, we first make sure that we know that the month jumps over. Then it's the first of the month. And then we place the date hand on the first. And then we can put the hour hand on top when the date changes one more time. So I also got new hour and minute hands and seconds hand for the watch. But this hand does not fit. That is the bend in the date hand, and that is the tip of the hour hand. So that dog won't hunt. So these are the hands I got on the right, and then we have the original hands on the left here. When I say original hands, so keep in mind that the hour and minute hands were original on this watch. There was no seconds hand. So what I'm calling the original seconds hand here is from that spare movement. So after cleaning up the original hands a little bit, we can see that this hour hand is much shorter. So it does actually fit with in the bend of the date hand. So then it's a matter of placing it at midnight so that the date flips over when the hand crosses midnight. And then we can put the minute hand on. And we're just going to double check that it flips over close to midnight. Should be within 15 minutes to and fro, but we should be able to get it more to within about 5 minutes. So that looks just fine. So then the seconds hand. So that seconds hand is from the spare movement, which does not have half a mile between the dial and the plate. So we're going to take the tube out of this one and make a new one. So the tube hole is around 0.2 millimeters. So that's the thickness of that bore I have here. We're first going to press the old tube out of the hand so that we can make a new tube and fit that into the hand. And this is pretty delicate work. We're going to use a watchmaker's lathe to create a shoulder on the new tube. And that shoulder we will use to rivet the hand onto the new tube. So we're going to use this little piece of brass rod. Here's our 0.2 millimeter drill. And yes, there are many of them, because as you might imagine, they're relatively easy to break. So I cut off a piece of the brass rod and put that in the Jacob's chuck on the left here. And then I have first a center drill. And then this tiny, itsy bitsy, teeny little drill, 0.2 millimeters, that I'm then gonna drill the hole into the brass rod with. And with that, we get our new crown tube. I used the watchmaker's lathe to take off the shoulder on the front. And then we can put that into the lathe again. Put the hand onto that shoulder, and then we're going to use a couple of stakes to rivet it onto the new tube. Steady. Steady. And I'm first just pressing the hand flat onto the tube. And then I'm using a sharp-ended stake to spread the shoulder on the top of the hand. And this is why I did that in the lathe, so I could rotate the whole hand. And then I'm going to do the same thing with a flat stake to spread the rivet flat on top. So then the end result will look pretty okay. Not ideal, but then again, there's no way I would be able to find a second sand for this movement. And it does work. For the case then, it has also seen better decades. We are not going to be able to take out all the marks on it. They're simply too deep, a lot of them. But we will make the case look a bit better. First we're just going to clean it and put it through the ultrasonic, and then we're going to go to the polishing room. And yeah, it is a polishing room. Technically it has a door, but it's like 1 square meter. So after doing this in ultrasonic, which I'm not going to show, we're going to take the parts to the polishing room. First going to polish the case. I trimmed one of the wheels so it's a little bit rounded to fit the profile of the case. And then we're going to take out most of the marks, but again we're not going to be able to take out all of them. That would remove too much material. The case back has flat sides, so I'm marking it up with some Sharpie, and then we're going to try to find the right angle against the lapping disc, which I did do here, but then managed to not show it properly to the camera. But when we find the right angle, the sides of the case back is then flat against the lapping disc, and we can take out the marks on it. We use a few different grits as well. The rougher grits are to take out the bigger scratches, and then we go up in grit to take out the smaller and smaller scratches until we have a mirror finish. To get the mirror finish, I use these mops. The mop on the left is for taking out the micro scratches, and the one on the right is to give it a high luster. So with that we can put the movement back in the case. The stem is a little bit too long. I had to replace it. You might have seen the old stem was completely rusted. So I got a new stem, and I also got a new crown, well, an old crown rather. And then I also put on a new crystal. So here we are. It is still not a new watch. I don't think it should be, but it looks, I think, a lot better. One thing I didn't show is that I also put on the brushing on the case back. It was originally brushed, but it was very worn, so I put on the new brushing as well. And that's how that looks. So let's compare them and see if we see any difference from before to after. Before seeing the watch on the wrist, I just want to remind everyone that at vintagewatchservices.eu you will always find more than 100 beautiful vintage watches. And as a subscriber, you can use this coupon code for 10% off. And there we have it. Beautiful 1940s Jaeger-LeCoultre. Hopefully it brings some good memories to Walter and his father. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then clicking like and subscribe will really help the channel, so do consider that. I'll be back with another video shortly. Until then, ta-ta.